The information provided by Trading Forex Price Action to you does not constitute personal financial advice. The information provided is of a general nature only and does not take into account your individual objectives, financial situation, or needs. It should not be used, relied upon, or treated as a substitute for specific professional advice.
Hey guys, this is a weekly forecast for November 21st through the 25th of 2022. Okay, we'll start off with the Audnzd pair.
Okay, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by the current setup I was looking at. So the last weekly long trade that formed was right here. And the last weekly short trade that formed was right here. And so the weekly risk parameters was between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. And so the question we wanted to answer is whether price will reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low, or vice versa. And then if you recall, the following week, roughly in these areas right here, there was lower confirmation of strong short strength on the 4-hour chart, which confirmed this weekly bias to be short. Or in other words, price is likely to reach this pivot low before reaching this pivot high. Okay, however, I did not take this short entry, for I did not get enough of a pullback to the stop loss level, which is right here, to entice me to take a short entry. Okay, and so at this point, there's actually a possibility of strong long strength being confirmed on the lower time frames, which can possibly change this bias into long. So let me go ahead and show you what that's about. Let's go over to the 4-hour chart. Okay, so on this 4-hour chart, that weekly bias's risk parameters is between this pivot high and that pivot low way below on that weekly long trade I just showed you. And then initially, we got this strong long confirmation right here with a breakout and immediate break back in from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here. Okay, so when we got this immediate break back in, that created normal long strength. However, price came right back down to that pivot low to override that normal long strength and thus create strong short strength. Okay, so at this point, that weekly bias was confirmed to be short. And thus I was waiting for a pullback right up to these 1.13 levels for a short entry with a stop loss at this pivot high. However, I did not get that pullback. Okay, then following that, price headed toward this weekly bias's main target. And then last week, right at this point right here, there was confirmation of normal short strength. And that's from this trend line, from this pivot to this pivot right here. Okay, so at this point, if price could rise up to this pivot high right here, where this normal short strength was created, well, that would show strong long strength and confirm that weekly bias to be long at that point. In which case, I'll be willing to take a long entry with a stop loss at this pivot low right here. Now you want to remember the stop loss is placed at this pivot low right here and not the weekly bias's long trades pivot low, because like I explained in earlier forecasts, there's overarching long strength on this pair to begin with, which gives us the opportunity to take mid-row long entries in which the stop loss can be placed at the major pivot low of where that lower confirmation formed. Okay, so if price reaches this pivot high right here, creating strong long strength, the major pivot low for this lower confirmation will be at this pivot right here. Okay, so we'll just have to see what happens with this one, and I'll keep you guys updated. Okay, so let's go on to the Euro Pound. Okay, and if you're having trouble understanding what I'm talking about in terms of weekly biases and lower confirmations, please download the Forecast Manual, which is an instruction manual that helps you better understand these forecasts. And so if there's a concept that you don't understand in these forecasts, or a term that you don't understand, you could look it up in the Forecast Manual. Okay, and the link for that is in the details section of this video. Okay, this is a weekly chart. We'll start off with an overview. So since there was a breakout, an immediate break back in right here of this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here, which confirmed normal short strength. However, price came right up to that pivot high to override that normal short strength and create strong long strength. And moreover, roughly 2 months ago, there was a strong weekly rejection candle that formed right here, which often forms before a failure of strong long strength that was formed right here. And so in the long term, I am short biased right back down to this pivot low right here. And moreover, since there was a weekly long trade that formed in this area right here, and a weekly short trade that formed last week right here. However, I'm waiting for the lower confirmations to confirm this weekly bias. And so in the short term, I'm neutral biased. Okay, let's talk entries. Okay, this is a weekly chart. Let me run you by the current setup I'm looking at. So the last weekly long trade that formed was right here. And then about 2 months later, there was a weekly short trade that formed right here. And so at this point, the weekly bias's risk parameters was between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. However, last week, right at this point right here, where this doji is, there was a new weekly short trade that formed, which now makes the weekly risk parameters between this pivot high and this pivot low. Okay, so you want to remember that even if there's already a weekly bias that formed between a short trade and a long trade, if a new short trade forms, like in this case right here, the risk parameters will change. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what is providing long strength for this long trade and short strength for this short trade. So let's go over to the monthly chart. Okay, so on this monthly chart, that weekly long trade formed right here, and that weekly short trade formed right here last week. Now let's look at what's providing long strength for that long trade first. Okay, so first of all, we have this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Okay, let's see how many contact points it has. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, you want to remember the more contact points there are on a trend line, the more future strength it creates. Okay, and moreover, we have this small gap right here providing long strength for that weekly long trade. So let me go ahead and show the levels for that. Okay, so the upper level of that gap is at 84.12 and the lower level will be at 84.01. And so we have this small gap also providing long strength for that weekly long trade. Now, however, there's also a medium-sized gap right here that's actually providing short strength for that weekly long trade because the weekly long trade is running right into it. Okay, so let me show you the levels for that gap also. Okay, so the upper level is at 84.74 and the lower level is at 84.26. Okay, and the way you want to calculate the ultimate strength for that weekly long trade is that first of all, since this upper gap that's providing short strength is bigger than this small gap providing long strength, the result of these two gaps is actually negative long strength. Okay, and so we have to subtract some long strength from this trend line right here that's actually providing long strength. Okay, so ultimately the only thing that's providing long strength for that long trade is this strong trend line right here. Okay, so now let's see what's providing short strength for that weekly short trade right here. Now, first of all, we have a trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Let's see how many touches we have on it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 touches on this trend line that's providing short strength. Okay, moreover, we have this really small gap right here that's providing short strength. So let me show you the levels for that. Okay, the upper level is at 87.75 and the lower level is at 87.66. Okay, but once again, there's another small gap right here that's providing long strength for that weekly short trade. Again, because the weekly short trade is running right into that gap. Okay, so let me show you the levels for that also. So the upper level is at 87.55 and the lower level is at 87.30. Okay, so just like in the long situation, since the lower gap right here is bigger than this upper gap right here, there's actually negative future short strength for this short trade from these gaps. Okay, so we're going to have to subtract that also from this trend line right here that's actually providing short strength for that short trade. Okay, so in this case also, the only thing that's providing short strength for that weekly short trade is this trend line. Okay, so as a result, since the bottom trend line right here had 6 touches on it, and this upper trend line right here only has 5 touches on it, and since the more contact points on the trend line, the more future strength it creates, that weekly long trade seems to be slightly stronger than that weekly short trade. Okay, but the higher time frame bias's direction is ultimately decided by the lower time frame confirmations. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what's happening there. Let's go over to the 4-hour chart. Okay, so on this 4-hour chart, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now if price can come up to this trend line, break it out, and immediately break back in, which creates normal short strength. However, price comes right back up to that pivot high to create strong long strength. Well, that'll confirm that weekly bias to be long. However, in this pair's case, like I showed you on the overview, there is a possibility that a weekly short trend may be beginning to form. And so I much rather have that weekly bias to be confirmed as short. Now, a way you could get that from this setup right here is when this strong long strength is confirmed, if there's a V-shaped recovery that forms on the lower time frames, overriding this strong long strength to create extreme short strength, that will confirm that weekly bias to be short, in which case I'll be willing to take a short entry with a stop loss at this pivot high right here and its main target way below at that weekly long trade's pivot low. Okay, so we'll just have to see what the lower confirmations say in terms of this weekly bias, and I'll keep you guys updated with this one.
Okay, so when you're analyzing the strength of a long or short trade, don't forget to subtract the elements that are creating counter strength. Now in the Euro Pound example I just showed you, there were only gaps that created counter strength. But remember, there are times when trend lines and even price patterns create counter strength. So you want to watch out for those too. Okay, so that's it. And I hope you guys have a great week, guys. And thanks for watching. Goodbye.